You're listening to episode 80, Choosing to be the Hero Instead of the Victim, with Amy Clover. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode, and thank you for tuning in. I'm so glad to have you here, as always. And this week I'm going to be joined by someone who I've known for a couple of years now, and that is Amy Clover of Strong Inside Out. And I'm really glad to be able to bring her story here to you today. Before we get into it, though, I just want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by Audible.com. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. I signed up with them to get you a free audiobook download along with a 30-day free trial. They have over 180,000 titles, including some that have been mentioned on this show in the past, that you can choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or whatever you use as an MP3 player. So if this is something that interests you and you haven't checked it out yet, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible, and you can go ahead and get your free audio download along with that 30-day free trial. So Amy and I first met in January of 2014 at an event called New Media Expo in Las Vegas, and we had known each other for a little bit from the online space before then. And then later on in 2014, I got to go to one of her fitness boot camps that she was doing. She was touring around the country doing these boot camps and spreading her message. And we were doing these high-intensity interval training workouts, and I can tell you that that definitely kicked my butt. But it was a lot of fun and great to connect with Amy. So yeah, I'm just really glad to have her on the show today. And we're going to talk about Amy's struggle with depression and obsessive compulsive disorder as she was in high school. And, you know, those are two things that I have definitely battled with over the years. And I'm sure that many of you listening have done so as well. I'm sure at least the depression piece is common for many of you. And Amy's going to tell us about how she tried to keep her suffering to herself and why she did that. And she's also going to talk about how she felt like what she was dealing with was a life sentence, and so she never tried to live any different way. And she's going to share with us what her experience was like of being in the hospital after having felt suicidal. And she's going to talk about how she was getting into relationships in order to validate herself. But then we're going to talk about when Amy got tired of being the victim and what changed for her and how she chose to become the hero instead of the victim. And she's going to talk about how fitness has helped her to get to where she is today and how she handles depression now when it comes up for her, and her advice for you if you're someone who struggles with depression or, you know, just kind of gets in that cycle of kind of having good days and bad days and how to kind of bounce back from those a little more quickly. And then we're going to close things out by talking about how you are stronger than you realize. So like I said, I'm excited to bring this episode to you today. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Amy on, and I'll catch you in the outro. Amy, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on here. You and I have known each other for a little while now from the online world.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've also met in person a couple of times as well. And I'm just so grateful that we're doing this episode because you have such an inspiring story that I know has been helping others who hear about it. And I know that it's going to help the listeners of the show as well. And I know that we don't have a lot of time here. We're going to do about a 30-minute episode. So I want to make sure that we make the most of that for the audience. So I'd say we just dive right in. Is that okay with you?
Let's go for it.
All right. So yeah, I'd just love to have you start us out by telling us your story. You know, share with us just kind of that summary of what you went through, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I think it's such important work that you're doing here. And I really love the way that you go about it. So it's definitely an honor to be on here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And so as far as my story goes, which is basically the foundation of Strong Inside Out, which is my site, is that in high school, I was diagnosed with clinical depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. And when I was diagnosed, people around me didn't believe it was a real thing. And so I just learned to shut it all up inside, to just suck it up and pretend like nothing was wrong. But the whole time I was suffering so much, I didn't know what to do with all of these emotions, with all of these compulsions to say I was walking down the hallways in high school and I'd feel like I'd have to touch a certain amount of lockers. Otherwise, something horrible would happen to my family members. That's kind of what OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder feels like. So I had all of this suffering within me that I was trying not to show to anyone else. And shutting it all up inside for so long actually led it to kind of explode. Later on in high school, I became kind of the rebellious punk rock kid and yelled at teachers in the middle of classes and all of that kind of stuff. I just was acting out because I didn't know how to handle all of this pain. And so I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol and all the wrong kinds of relationships. And it just spiraled out of control until finally in my early 20s, I just decided that I was done fighting. I didn't want to struggle anymore. It was too hard. And I was hospitalized for trying to end my life. And it was in that hospital when all of my choices were stripped from me. I had no choice whether to go to bed at a certain time, whether to take medications. I had no idea what they were going to do. All of these things I had no control over. And I realized that in my life outside of the hospital, I did have some control. I did have some choices. And I had just assumed that this depression and OCD was a life sentence because people had told me that my entire life, that I never even tried to live in a different way. So when I got released from the hospital, I started on a years-long journey of starting to turn my life around and really trying different things. And it took a few years to really find what worked for me. But what I've really found worked for me was a mix of cognitive behavioral therapy with a trusted therapist and fitness. I found that the stronger I focused on getting within the gym, the stronger I started getting outside of the gym as well. So when I focused on really pushing myself to my limits, getting stronger, showing myself that I could achieve more strength by pushing through the difficult parts of my workouts, I was doing that same thing in life as well. It really paralleled my outside life. And so over the last few years, I've really become this person who has shown herself that I can be so much more. And now it's my mission to show other people that they can be so much more too, if they just believe that they can and put practical actions in place.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so I'd like to, just kind of like dive into different parts of that here and ask you some questions. Now, one of the things I'm curious about is, do you know like what led to the depression and OCD? Was there anything that happened, or was it just, a chemical imbalance thing?
It was a little bit of both, I think. It's clinical depression is a chemical imbalance. But I think that also just there were a lot of factors. I was made fun of while I was growing up, which was, never fun. And then some other factors in there as well. But so I think it was kind of a mix of both things. But I know that clinical depression still hits me sometimes now. And so it is a chemical imbalance that sometimes comes around with triggers and sometimes just comes around whenever it feels like it.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. And then, you were talking about how you just, you kept this all to yourself. You were keeping it inside, and that just made it so much worse. And that led to things kind of blowing up for you, as you said, and acting out. And that's something that, I've been talking with people here on the show about recently, and, not sharing what you're going through and how damaging that can be in and of itself. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, why do you think that you were keeping it to yourself? Did you feel like you couldn't talk about it with anyone, or what was kind of the reason for that?
Well, yeah, I felt like I couldn't talk about it with anyone because the few people that I talked to about it weren't ready for it at that time.
Mhm.
They didn't know how to handle it. I remember I said to one of my best friends, I was so stigmatized around it. There's so much stigma around mental illness. And I was struggling so much, and I thought I was so weird for having these things. And I opened up to one of my friends about it, and she said, "I don't believe that's a real thing. I think it's just a call for attention." And so I
Mm.
learned to just shut it all up inside because no one was ready to hear what I had to share. And I felt like the therapists I was working with at that time were more judgmental and condescending than they were helpful. So it was just kind of this perfect storm of horrible support at that time
Yeah.
that just led me to shut it all up inside. And I think it's so important to know that now that we're starting to talk about these things, that the right kind of support is out there for you if you continue to search for it. I think maybe back then, if I had kept searching, I could have found somebody who did actually understand in the way that I needed to be understood or needed to be heard. But I just didn't know to keep looking because I thought that's all there was.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. When was it that you had um, made that suicide attempt?
It was in 2005.
Okay.
And it was a threat on my life. I actually went into the ER and said that I was thinking about suicide. It wasn't actually like admission from, the attempt itself. Just to be clear
Okay.
about that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. What was that like for you when you got admitted to the hospital at that time?
It was at my absolute lowest I've ever been. I've never been angrier my entire life. I kind of have a thing against authority. And so being forced into, a hospital against my will and then being forced to do all of these things I had no control over, um, was just, it was really an eye opener. It was really an eye opener as far as like realizing that I had some semblance of control that I'd really taken for granted for so long. So it was really awful, but that's actually not the first time that I was hospitalized. I was hospitalized in high school as well, when I mentioned to my parents that I was having thoughts of suicide then too.
So this was in 2005. So did things kind of change for you at this point, or did you continue to struggle for a little bit longer?
I continued to struggle for a little bit longer because I knew I wanted to make a change, but I didn't know how that was going to happen. So
Right, because you said that you felt like you couldn't like do things any differently. Like the way you were doing things was how they had to be, right?
yeah,
Like you felt stuck like that.
yeah, I felt stuck. I didn't know. I didn't have the wherewithal to see outside of my own perspective. I really needed a paradigm shift. And it took a few years to allow for that to happen. I needed the right support in my life. I needed other experiences in my life. And so it took more struggle and almost getting back down to that point to, to breach the surface of that paradigm that I was living in. And it took, let's see, about like, I'd say 2 or 3 years more of struggle to
Mm,
really reach that point.
sure. Sure. And how was this all kind of, impacting your life at this time? Was it affecting relationships, affecting your ability to function normally, to work and things like that?
Oh, completely. Yeah. At the time that I was hospitalized, afterwards, in order to get out of the hospital, I had to commit to an intensive outpatient program that I'd have to go to 5 days a week. I believe it was 5 days a week, for about 5 hours at a time. And for that, I needed to get a medical release for my job that I had at that time. It affected all of my relationships. It affected the relationships I got into because I was still unaware of the fact that I was getting into relationships to validate myself, to say that I was worth anything at all. Because if nobody else loved me, then I wasn't lovable. But if I was loved by someone else, then it meant I was. I wasn't self-validating at that point. And so that led to, a lot of clinginess on my part, codependency, and a lot of unhealthy habits on that side. So it kind of snowballs, it affects everything in your life until you start finally realizing that you're worth the work it takes to get out of it.
So when did you start realizing that for yourself?
I think that the sparks were there when I got out of the hospital, but I finally fully realized it. I think back in about 2008 when I had a conversation. It was after a horrible breakup, probably one of the worst I've ever been through. And I thought this man was my life. I thought I was going to be with him forever. And I really was completely blind to the fact that it was emotionally abusive. And I got out of the relationship and I was just crushed. I started having thoughts of suicide again. And a friend took me out for lunch. I think he could sense that something was wrong. And I just broke into tears and I was sobbing, and he's trying to make me feel better. And I just said, I'm so tired of being the victim. I'm just so tired of being the victim. And he couldn't say anything. And I didn't realize until later when I got home that I was choosing to be the victim. I was accepting that role in my life because I was refusing to accept the hero role instead. I was refusing to acknowledge that that was a part of me just as much as the victim was a part of me, but I could choose to, embrace that hero role just as much as I could embrace the victim role. So from that point forward, I really made the decision to act from a place of love, to act as if I was my own hero, and really take those actions, really act as if I was that person, even if I didn't feel it already. And it completely changed my life from then on.
I think that's so powerful, and yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, to make that decision to start acting, from the hero role and not the victim role. But yeah, if you can get to that point, that's when things can definitely shift for you.
Yeah, completely. And it's not something that you can just decide to do. It's something that it's almost like a realization. It's like a waking up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so that's why it's going to be like different for everybody. And, it's going to take different things for each person to have that realization. So tell us, more about fitness and how you got into that and how that started to help you.
Sure. I kind of fell into it by accident. I had been working out for a long time, but more from the basis of like, I was an actress back in my past life, and I was acting in Hollywood, and if I wasn't a size 00, then I was too big by my own standards, not by anybody else's. And so I was always working out for that result. But when I started working out, I just started realizing that when I did strength training, I was really feeling stronger when I left the gym, and really feeling like I'd accomplished something. And that feeling would, affect my actual life outside of the gym as well. Like it would really make me feel more powerful outside of the gym. And so when I started getting my personal trainer certification, which I got, by the way, as a way to get out of serving tables, it wasn't actually like a conscious decision on my part to start getting healthier mindset wise. But when I started working on my personal trainer certification, I started realizing that more so and more so. And then when I started doing my actual personal training and seeing how much I was affecting other people's lives, I started realizing I could affect my own as well. And so it just came kind of gradually. It wasn't just like an aha moment. It just came over time, and small realization after small realization, I came to find that fitness was an essential part of my recovery.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that it's a big part of your life today and what you do today. And how would you say, Amy, that you're doing overall today?
I think I'm doing fantastically. I just want to be clear though, that growth is an ongoing process. It's never ending. So while I say that I have all of these achievements, I know how to handle my depression when it comes up now, and it passes through much more quickly now. It still does hit. It hits, and sometimes I feel lost, and sometimes I struggle, and sometimes I think that I'm not going to get out of it while I'm in the moment. But it only lasts for a certain amount of time. I never feel that feeling like I'm going to give up. I always know that I'm going to go through it and get through it. And I have that faith that I'm going to pull out the other side. So it's an ongoing process. And I feel like by being able to share what I've been through and help other people through what I've been through. Like I have a program called the Strong Inside Out Bootcamp, which is an online support system and workout program to help people start on the path of behavioral activation, which is what basically I did, taking the actions before you actually feel the feelings behind them, the wanting to do it. And it's been more rewarding than anything else in my life to take people through that program and just seeing people change their lives, change their mindsets. It's really just amazing watching those people do that. And it's healing for me as well to help other people through that. So I think that it's just, it's got its ups and downs, but it's definitely more ups than downs, especially compared to where I was before now. And I'm in a state where I can share a lot of this with other people. I feel like I've gotten past the point of stigma and I'm able to talk openly about this, which also helps other people heal by talking about it themselves. And it's just really a gift, honestly.
And I'm glad that you kind of, you bring up that point that like, even though you're doing really well today, you still have things that you struggle with. You still deal with depression off and on because that's kind of the reality of it for most people. There are going to be things that you continue to struggle with. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that things can't be good.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that kept me from it before was that I was stuck in this state of struggle and I was in the state of dwelling. I'd always focus on the depression. And if it wasn't there, the depression that was going to come. Instead of really being in the moment, mindfulness has been a huge part of my journey. It's really essential to me. I meditate every single day and I try to practice mindfulness in everything I do. And, part of that is just going through the stages of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is focused on mindfulness. But it's a lot of what I do. And it's just so, so important and such an essential part of my healing journey. And I think that it could be for a lot of people out there as well. Just really being aware of the things that we do have to be grateful for in our lives right now. No matter where you are, there are things to be grateful for. There are things to treasure. There are people who care about us in our lives, and we are never completely lost, not ever.
So are these the things that you focus on when you do feel any kind of depression today? Mindfulness, exercise, those are things that help you to get through it?
Those are my tools. But I think that the essential part of my getting through my depression quicker is allowing myself to be okay with not being okay. I've realized just really majorly over this last year that when I try to resist it, when I try to fight the fact that my depression is here, it lasts so much longer. It's so much more painful. So when I actually allow myself to just fall into it and stand in the chaos of the storm as it comes, allow myself to fully feel it and be present with it and honor whatever it is here to teach me, the faster it goes through, the faster I learn those lessons that it's there to teach me. And the more I'm able to learn because of it, instead of resisting it and fighting it and pretend it's not there. So that's something that I'd really encourage other people out there in the audience to do themselves, is just when the depression comes around, when the struggle comes around, feel it. Allow yourself to be in it. Allow yourself to feel that pain, knowing that it is not permanent, that this too shall pass. That's one of my favorite mantras. And I'm not even really that religious, but this too shall pass is something I talk to myself just a lot. I use mantras a lot when struggle is present. When I say this too shall pass, it reminds me that everything is temporary. Everything is temporary, and the light will come again.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I know for myself, whenever I'm having a bad day or something, and I get down on myself for that, and I'm like, you can't be like this. You have to be, you got to pull yourself together, and you gotta be okay. That makes it so much harder.
Yeah.
Instead of just letting it just kind of run its course and do its thing, which, I think at times can feel like more scary to let that happen.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where it's going to take you. I think, it's definitely important to go easy on yourself when you're not feeling 100%,
Yeah. I think that I always tell my clients that if you imagine that you have this person inside you, and a lot of people call it the inner child, right? This person who's demanding to be heard, that when you're struggling, that person needs to be heard, needs to be appreciated, needs to be loved. And if you imagine the way that you talk to yourself, imagine talking to someone else who you love very much in that same way. Would you ever talk to somebody else like that? And I realized for myself that that is never the case. I'm so mean to myself. I'm so horrible to myself. And I think that a lot of us can kind of resonate with that. And if we can just take a step back or just stop, take deep breaths, take a step back and ask ourselves, if somebody we loved more than anybody else in the world were going through this, how would we talk to them? And then talk to ourselves in that way, really bring ourselves up in that way and be gentle and kind and loving to ourselves. I bet we would heal a lot faster if we allowed ourselves to really be that kind, loving person we need ourselves to be.
Good advice. So, Amy, tell us a little more about what you have going on today. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but tell us more about Strong Inside Out and everything that you have going on there.
Sure. Strong Inside Out is my site. It's stronginsideout.com. We've got a whole bunch of fun stuff happening there. All the main stuff happens on the blog there. I write every other week or so, depending on how I feel inspired. I don't force myself to write. I write when I'm inspired and when I have something to give instead of just posting to post now. So it's, it's not necessarily on that schedule. But I write about what's real and what's raw for me at that time and what's helping me at that time. I write to share what I'm going through and what others are going through and what's helped them, and resources and stuff like that. Something else that's cool is I'm part of a group of 12 elite trainers as part of the largest gym chain in Europe called McFit and Cyberobics. And I teach a class called Bodylicious and Athletic Core. So if you're over in Europe, please go try my class at Cyberobics. We've got more fun stuff coming your way for that. And I'm also getting into the field of intuitive eating. It's really important for me because I know part of my journey has been healing from eating disorders. And so I'm starting to take people through the process of getting in touch with our real needs and what we really need to honor in ourselves instead of eating over it or restricting over it. So that's something that I'm getting into with a program I call the Phoenix Method. And then what I talked to you about before was the Strong Inside Out Bootcamp. And that's my program for people with depression or anxiety. There's 2 separate tracks that you can go on, one for depression and one for anxiety. And there's specialized workout programs for each track and a specialized support system for those tracks, including biweekly group coaching calls with me. And it's just the most supportive, just the most raw and real environment to really heal. It's amazing watching people heal through that program, just through talking out loud about what they're going through and proving to themselves that they can take the actions that are necessary to really heal themselves through the workout program. It's really cool to watch. So if you have any questions about any of those things, contact me at stronginsideout.com/contact. I'll gladly get back to you and talk to you about those things, or just check them out on stronginsideout.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And of course, I'll definitely have that linked up on the show notes page. So yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of great stuff going on. And, I'm for one, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where you're going in the future and everything that, happens for you.
Thank you. Me too.
So Amy, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today. Given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, I actually wrote a whole post about this. I wrote a letter to myself that's up on stronginsideout.com. It's actually one of my most popular blog posts up there. But
you'll have to send me the link and I can put it on the show notes.
I'll definitely send you the link because I think it could be really helpful. There are a couple of links that I'd really love to share with your listeners here that I think would be really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah.
But I think the main thing I'd say is just that you're stronger than you know. And the fact that you're feeling this doesn't mean that you're worth any less. Emotions are not weakness. The ability to be with our emotions and acknowledge our emotions is true strength in my book. And so the more that you allow yourself to honor those emotions, to be with them, experience them, and grow through them, the stronger you're going to be. So please hang in there. This too shall pass.
Well said. Thank you. And Amy, I just want to thank you for coming on here today and for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure it's going to inspire those listening. So thank you for that.
I'm so grateful that you had me on, gave me the experience to share this message with more people. Thank you.
Absolutely. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 80. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Amy Clover to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. And Amy did send me over a couple of links that she wanted me to share with you that she thought you might be interested in checking out. So definitely be sure to go over to the show notes page to check those out. And one thing from the episode that I want to talk about a little bit more here is when we were talking about how Amy thought that what she was experiencing with the depression and the OCD and everything that she was struggling with at that point, when she thought that was a life sentence, and how that led her to, never trying to live in a different way. And maybe for some of you, a light bulb kind of went off at that point in the episode, because maybe you realized for the first time that you could do things differently. And the thing is that once you start doing things differently, then you start to see things change, and you realize that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be stuck. Whatever you're going through doesn't have to be a life sentence. Maybe you will always struggle with things, maybe like Amy, you'll have depression that'll rear its ugly head every once in a while. But like we were saying, that doesn't mean that you can't live a great life, And it's when you have that realization that you can start to be the hero of your journey. You can make that choice to be the hero. Because of course, up until that point, you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. But once you realize that, that's such a powerful thing, and it can be such a game changer. And so that's why I just wanted to mention it again here to make sure that that was clear to you and that you got that message, because I believe it's such an important one. So I hope that that helps, and I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode, and I also hope that you will join me here again next week. I'm going to be joined by the Purpose Fairy herself, Luminita Saviuk. Luminita is the creator of the popular blog over at purposefairy.com. Perhaps you know of it. If not, then we'll get you familiar with it next week. And she's also the author of the newly released book, 15 Things You Should Give Up to Be Happy, which is based on a blog post that she wrote of the same name that now has over 1.3 million shares. And we're just going to get a little bit philosophical on that one and just talk about life and Luminita's perspective on being happy and letting go of things, including past traumas. So like I said, I hope that you will come back and join me for that one. And of course, I just want to remind you that if you're interested in checking out that deal from Audible, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Audible, and you'll be able to check that out. And of course, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.